And just think, parents, Christmas is just around the corner, It's just about to get here. But, sometimes it feels like no matter how much you try and get it right with your kids, you somehow manage to get it wrong, It's like you're trying everything in your power to do what your kids want, not to please them, but just, to actually connect with them and actually do what they're asking. And somehow you still manage to do the opposite of what they wanted, even though you're doing exactly what they said. And when it comes to my kids, honestly, I have to brag on my kids. My kids are really good when it comes to presents. When it comes to presents, they could really care less, and they're very grateful for it. But it's a totally different story when they get to the drive-thru at any fast food restaurant. When we're at McDonald's or at Burger King, and I love my kids, so I didn't ask for permission, but I am sharing this story. But, whenever we get to the drive-thru at McDonald's or Burger King, you can't just let them see the menu and pick from there. You kind of have to give them options, and it's got to be a maximum of 3, 2, 3 max. So you get there and you tell them, this is what you can order. And you start to tell them, and they're like, you know what, I'll actually take a double cheeseburger. And it's like, okay, sounds good. Wait, no. Maybe I'll take the chicken nuggets. Okay, decide. Is that what you want? You know what? I'll take the chicken sandwich. And it's like, come on, Okay, so then we get to the drive-thru, we order, and the person actually hears our order. We get through it, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like we get our order, we place our order, and we get home, we unpack the food, and even though we got them the last thing that they said, somehow they have suffered amnesia from the restaurant to the house, and you got them the wrong thing. You're like, I got you what you asked for, and I still somehow managed to get it wrong. And sometimes this becomes the stuff that we have to deal with on a daily basis as parents. But if we're being honest, it's not just kids that are sometimes like this. It's also adults. It's also parents. I remember when I was in middle school, I was growing up, when I was growing up in Texas, it's always hot in Texas. And I was at my parents' house, and my mom's getting food ready, and she says, I just realized that I need some avocados, because that's what Mexicans need all the time, avocados. But, and she's like, can you do me the favor and just run to the grocery store / gas station? The gas station had a mini grocery store within it, and she asked if I could just make a run for her with my bike. So I got my Huffy bike, top notch, and headed over to the gas station that was a few blocks away from the house. As soon as I get to the store, I have to get myself a treat because it's on my mom. I had to sweat a storm to pick it up, so that's a compensation for what she got. I go to the the produce aisle, get the avocados, and I put them in the bag, head home. I get home, and I'm not even kidding. I hand my mom the bag, and it's not even seconds. I think it was just reaction. And she stops me, and she's like, were these the best avocados that they had? And, of course, in Spanish, because she doesn't speak very good English. But she's like, are these the best avocados that they had? And it's like, they're as hard as a rock. So in my defense, I'm no professional cook. I haven't been on Chopped or anything. So I'm like, it looks like an avocado, costed the same as an avocado. Give it a couple of weeks, and it'll taste exactly the same as a ripe avocado. In my mind, it's an avocado, But in her mind, she had this idea and expectation of what she was going to get, yet she didn't get it. She ended up getting pretty much rocks, in the shape of an avocado. And I didn't meet that expectation. Now, being an adult, being a parent, I find myself saying and doing the same things that my parents used to, say and do to me. I'm pretty much I've become my parents to my kids. And I believe that in and of itself, it's not bad to have expectations. I think it's a very good thing to have expectations. I believe that the issue comes, though, the problem comes when our expectations are met, just like in the opening clip with the iPod Nano, but we still remain unhappy because it isn't exactly the way that we pictured it. That's when the issue comes. It's when we actually have these expectations and we actually get what we wanted, but we're not happy about it. We actually get upset and we think that, somehow we got the short end of the stick. So what begins to happen is that we become high-maintenance people. We're just these high-maintenance people that we have to try to keep up with. People that continually have to be nurtured and serviced. And many issues come with it, as we're going to be talking about throughout this series. As we look at the book of Exodus, we come across the account of the Israelites who had been enslaved in Egypt. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, I'll just kind of give you the whole story in a nutshell. But the account is found in the book of Exodus, and it happens, God delivers the people of Israel through the midst of miracles, and in the midst of that, we find that Moses is called to go and help the people to come out of Israel. They are ordinary people, just like you and I. I think sometimes we look at the Bible and we're like, well, that's not necessarily reality. And no, it is reality. It is people. It is ordinary people with troubles, struggles, hard circumstances, just like you and me. They had the same kind of issues that they had to deal with, which really helps us to personalize today what the people are going through. That is God's people who meet on a weekly basis, hopefully more frequently. I know that sometimes, life gets crazy, but I'm encouraging you. If you really are not part of the heartbeat of the church, if you're not building relationships, as soon as things get tough, you're gonna just leave because there's nobody to do life with you. So I encourage you, don't let it just be on a weekly basis. Hang out with people throughout the week. But, as people who do life together, we all are going through different things. And some are pretty difficult, And I think sometimes we forget that the people of Israel were the same way. They were dealing with issues. They were dealing with sin in their lives that they had to address. And in the middle of where they're at in Egypt, they're dealing with a lot of stuff. The Israelites, God's people, you begin to see that not only are they going through a lot, they require a lot of patience. They require a lot of patience, a lot of nurturing, and a high level of maintenance. I mean, they just have to be maintained constantly. And if you aren't familiar with how the people of Israel became slaves of the Egyptians, in a nutshell, Joseph, we find his story in the book of Genesis, I believe it's chapter 37, was the son of Jacob, and Joseph is actually sold into slavery by his brothers. And he's taken to Egypt. When he's in Egypt, God uses Joseph by elevating him to the second in command. He elevates him and he becomes a person that helps for people not to starve to death because there is a famine that comes. Joseph becomes that second in command. Eventually, the people move to Egypt because they were living in a different land. Eventually, there comes a new king into power who has no idea what Joseph did and realizes that the people of Israel are starting to outnumber them. So what he does is he makes them their slaves. In a nutshell, that's how they got to be slaves. So the king of the king of Egypt makes the Israelites their slaves, and now they are having children that are being born into slavery, right? Now they're being born, and they're just being born slaves. That's the way that it happens. And a baby is born during this time by the name of Moses, who will become the person that God will use to deliver the people of Israel. However, Moses ends up killing a man. He runs away for 40 years, and this all happens in all this time. But before the time of Moses, and even during Moses' exile and running away, the people of Israel have gone through a significant amount of pain. They've gone through oppression from the slave drivers. They have experienced a genocide of a generation during the time of Moses, not to mention any emotional scars that would have actually come from all that they've endured. So once again, the people of Israel are exactly like us. We have stuff that's going on in our lives. The people of Israel, God's people, have stuff that's going on in their lives as well. And as we get to the end of Exodus chapter 2, it says that years passed and the king of Egypt died. Now the king that is referring to is the one that would have been in power during Moses' time that he killed the Egyptian. So that king dies, but the Israelites continue to groan under their burden of slavery. So they're still going through a lot. And it says that they cried out for help, and their cry rose up to God. So they're going through a lot. And they're crying out to God, and it says that it's rising up to God, and God heard their groaning. And he remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God heard their groaning. They're crying out, and God hears that they're crying out. He looked down on the people of Israel and knew it was time to act. Once again, the people have gone through an incredible amount of pain and difficulty, and they're crying out to God from their suffering. It says that God hears their groans. Their cries of pain, distress, despair, sorrow. God's hearing all of it. And it says that he knew it was time to act. See, at times when we're going through difficult things, we're crying out and we're saying, God, help. I don't know how many times I've actually found myself in that situation where you're just like, I can't take this anymore. Can you please just come and help? I can't deal with it. And it says that the Israelites were going through difficult circumstances, and God heard their cries. And in a room full of broken people, because I'm not assuming that anybody has their life together, and if you think that you do, maybe you're not going through anything bad right now, but we all have seasons in life. Through death, through pain, through job transitions, whatever it is, we all go through pain. And in a room full of people that are broken with different circumstances, different difficulties and pain, I want you to take comfort knowing that he takes notice. Right? We're seeing that God notices the pain. He understands that there's this pain that the Israelites are going through, God's people. And at times when we are in the midst of the fire, there are those times where we pray, we cry, we groan with every emotion inside of us. And I think on a Sunday morning, we come in assuming that everybody has it together, and that's a pretty bad misconception. There are very few people that actually are going through something positive right now, just because there's always something going on. Even in my own life, there's things that I'm going through, and quite frankly, it's part of who we are, right? Your circumstances might be more difficult than mine, but you're just not sharing them. And we all have different things, but understand, take comfort, knowing that God notices our pain. We look around and we see situations and circumstances at times when we're going through difficult situations that seem unchanged. God's not acting upon it. God's not answering. And I'm telling you, he doesn't change. He does hear. But the reason that he may not be acting is because of what he is accomplishing in the midst of the waiting. And I'm telling you, even writing that for me was difficult. Because sometimes I don't want to wait. I'm tired of waiting. I just want God to act. But we serve a God who doesn't change and hears our cries. As we will continue to learn, even though the people of Israel were facing many difficult things, there's something else that's going on. They grew complacent in where they're at. Even though they're groaning now, they have been in Egypt for a while. From the time that Joseph was there to the time that Moses was born, there was a lap right there in time where they had been there for a while. And at times, we grow complacent in our situations, in our sins, in our struggles, in our addictions, and we're okay with staying there. We just grow complacent. It's not until we deal with the difficult things that we have to deal with as consequences. Because for the people of Israel, they were in the land of Egypt, right? But that's not where they were supposed to be. If you look at the book of Genesis, chapter 12, it says that the people were promised a land, and that was the promise that was made to Abraham, a land that they were not inhabiting. They had grown comfortable in Egypt. They were okay with it. But as they start to feel the pain of being under slavery, they cry out for help. They cry out for relief. They cry out for God to act upon it. And I know that it is easy to read accounts from the Bible and just kind of breeze right through them, understanding that they're historical, but we fail to study them as life applicable. See, these people are exactly like us. So how do I fit into the context of what the scripture is telling me? Because we're no different. And this is how. God has given us a promise of a new life, but we settle for a life of slavery. Typically, the time that we want to get out of the life of slavery is when we recognize that we have to deal with the consequences. Until then, we're okay with it. It's not a big deal. The people of Israel had grown complacent in Egypt, even though God was calling them to a promise. But they had grown complacent there. But God was still working in the midst of that. God gives us a promise, but sometimes we settle for what feels comfortable. And they cry out to the Lord, and that is typically what we do as well, right? We cry out to God. When we have settled for a life of slavery to sin, that's when we understand, you know what, we're broken. Rather than pursuing the promised life of freedom that Jesus promised. And maybe you're there today, you've come to that point, with your sin where you're seriously just like, I can't deal with it anymore. It's taking over everything in my life. It's consuming every part of me. Maybe you have come to that point because of your circumstances. Whatever it is, take comfort knowing that he notices. If you're in pain, God takes notice when you cry out to him. And not only does he take notice, but he acts when the time is right. It is not in our timing, it is in his. And as we continue to read through the passage, we see that Moses is called to go back to Egypt to deliver the people from the bondage of the Egyptians, from the hand of slavery. Moses and Aaron head back to Egypt. They call all the elders of Israel and tell them everything that the Lord had told Moses. And Moses performs miracles, right? We're not going to go into that. We've talked about this in weeks past, but I want to take a different vantage point on this because sometimes we just see it as a one story that we've heard over and over again. I'm not trying to add to Scripture. I just want you to see the side of God's people throughout the process. It says, Exodus 4:31 says, "Then the people of Israel were convinced that the Lord had sent Moses and Aaron after they had spoken to them. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped." There is something incredible that happens when we recognize that the creator of the universe and that takes notice of our lives that are simply a vapor and a speck in the universe, and that God notices our pain and is willing to act upon it. There is something spectacular that happens inside that causes us to worship him. And when the people of Israel heard that the Lord had not only taken notice, but was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they worshiped before they were ever delivered. And I think that this is something very important for us to take notice because sometimes we kind of attach something to it with God. We're like, if you do this, then I'll do this. That's not worship. That has nothing to do with worship. You're putting contingencies if God acts. What we actually see here is that the people worship God before they're even delivered. Because worship is not reserved for when God does something that we ask him to do. Worship is a response because we understand who he is regardless of our circumstances. And after this, Moses and Aaron meet with Pharaoh and ask him to let the people go. God is at work. His plan is unveiling, but Pharaoh refuses. And because of it, he actually makes the life of the Israelites even harder. He makes it even more miserable for them. See, they were getting straw because they had to build bricks, but now he's saying, you know what, they could get their own straw. And they have to keep on meeting the quota that we have for them. Their workload is elevated because of what has taken place. And now, they went from worshiping, but now they're unhappy. Once again, painting a pretty good picture of how we respond in worship. We expect for God to change things overnight, Hey, I asked you, God, by tomorrow morning it should be done. We expect for God to change everything. But the question is, how do we respond in the midst of the waiting? How do we respond in the midst of the difficulties and the pain? Do we trust that God is still working in the middle of all of it, even if things don't look very good at the moment? How do we respond when things look like this? Or do we respond like the Israelites? As they left Pharaoh's court, that would actually be the foreman of the Israelites. As they left Pharaoh's court, they confronted Moses and Aaron, who were waiting outside for them. The foreman said to them, "May the Lord judge and punish you for making a stink before Pharaoh and his officials. You have put a sword into their hands, an excuse to kill us." Now, keep in mind that God is still moving, right? We see the story from beginning to end. We understand that God is still moving in the midst of all of this. God's plan is still unraveling. It's still unfolding. However, the people aren't seeing that God is making a way. All that they can see is what they're facing at the moment. That's all that they can see. God's not at work anymore, and you're the reason for it. You're actually making it more difficult for us. And church, I'm telling you, regardless of your circumstance and what it appears to be, God takes notice, and God may act upon it. And when God acts, he more than likely isn't just moving in your life, he's moving in the lives of every individual around you. And sometimes we fail to see that. Because He's not just moving in the circumstance of the Israelites. Remember, he's moving and working in the midst of the life of Moses, because Moses was not even in Egypt. He was being called back to help and deliver the people of Israel. And he responds in obedience. But he was still in pain. He was fleeing. He was scared because of what he had to face in Egypt. And for me, I see Moses, and sometimes I completely get it. I'm like, I wouldn't want that either. I don't want this either. Because I don't want to deal with difficult people, and I don't want to deal with the mess that I have to deal with in my own life in front of everybody. But God is moving in the life of Moses. He was working through the stubbornness of Pharaoh, and he was working in the trust of the Israelites. Do you understand that there's a lot of things going on, but all that we could see is we could see ourselves in the middle of all of it. It's us. Why is God not doing this for me? Why is God not working the way that I want for him to be working? And God's people have an opportunity to trust that God is still at work, but all that they can see is there's still pain, and you're at the center of it. And all that they can see is that pain that they're in the middle of. Now, I'm not suggesting that your pain isn't real. I understand. We all go through pain. We all express it differently. We all deal with it in a way that sometimes, might make others uncomfortable. Sometimes we actually take it out on other people. I'm not suggesting that your pain isn't real. But what I am saying is that just because you don't see your circumstances changing doesn't mean that God isn't working to deliver you from them. Just because you're not seeing things change overnight doesn't mean that God's not working. He might be producing something even greater within you because you're continuing to pursue him. And once again, everybody has their own battles. Everybody's going through difficult things. And I know for myself, I think, what is it going to be like the moment that I get and stand before our Creator? And I look back in my entire life from beginning to end, how will I see things? Standing before a perfect and holy God that understood everything from beginning to end, that I was supposed to trust. How will I see every situation, everything that I have gone through? How different will I see everything in light of God's plan? How many opportunities did I miss? How many things that I thought that were just wasted times of my life was God actually moving me towards something greater? How many times did I miss God's hand in the midst of my trials when in reality, he was using people to move me into his purpose? Yet sometimes we're like the Israelites, right? Things, praise God, he heard my prayer. He's answering prayer. All of a sudden something goes wrong. Well, that's your fault, right? We change, we switch. All of a sudden we're not happy, even though God's still working, God's still moving. In church, at times we are so hurt from the things that we've gone through in our lives that we often forget to look back and see what God has delivered us from. We're just so wounded by everything that has happened in our lives that we're just like, God's not even listening anymore. But as we look back, we're like, oh, we've actually walked a ways away. God has actually moved us into a better place. He's moving us right now. And sometimes it seems like the circumstances are difficult, but God is still moving, even when you don't see your circumstances changing immediately. As we continue to read through the account of the Israelites in Egypt, the day comes when those moments of groaning and pain are behind them. Those are the moments that we look forward to, right? Because they're finally leaving Egypt. They're actually leaving, and they're going into the promised land. The day comes that God has delivered them from the Egyptians. God answered their prayers. They got what they asked for, right? That's what they were asking for. Deliverance from the oppression from the slave drivers. They got what they wanted, and God delivers them through many signs and wonders. The people leave Egypt and are freed from the bondage of slavery. God uses Moses to lead the people out, and they're on their way to the promised land. However, it doesn't take very long before they face another difficulty. And the Egyptians are now following and chasing them. And Exodus chapter 14, verse 10 through 12 says this: As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord. They're crying out again, right? And they said to Moses, "Why do you bring us out here to die? in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone, let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It is better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. There's a lot of stuff going on. We're going to actually break it down in just a second. But they're crying out to God again, right? They just left Egypt. They just left. And now they're going towards the promised land. And something happens, and all of a sudden it's like, they snap. All of a sudden it's different again. They cry out to God. And there's statement after statement that they're making that's pretty ridiculous and incredible. They are extremely high maintenance people. This is pretty much the cue for when there is anybody that's high maintenance. I'm going to tell you why. In case you don't know what high maintenance is, let me define it for you. It is people needing a lot of work to keep in good condition. The Israelites have left horrible living conditions that they were begging God to deliver them from. They are out of Egypt. They can look back and see the miraculous signs. Once again, there's been 10 signs that have been performed, and now they are free. They are making statements, though, like they forgot what they had asked for. Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Now, it's pretty ridiculous, right? I mean, it's not like Moses was planning, okay, let's just go and take them out so that they could all die. No. In order to leave a place of slavery and move to a place of freedom, you have to go on a journey in order to get there. They are in the wilderness, but they are moving towards the promise. Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? There's a sense of sarcasm, right? There wasn't enough graves for us back there that you had to bring us out here. There wasn't enough plots in Egypt for all of us to be buried. Is that the reason that you got us out here? Right? There's this sarcasm. What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Nobody forced them to leave Egypt. They were crying out to God. They were asking for God to act on their behalf. And now they're out of Egypt and they're saying, why did you make us leave? They are no longer under captivity, but now they are wishing they could be back. And then they make this pretty incredible statement. Leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's like a kid opening that present and saying, you got it wrong. You got the wrong type. Just let us go back to the thing that we kept on crying to God about because we were tired of it. Just let us go back to that place. They were tired of their circumstances, but now they're wishing they could be back in them. And here is the whole point of this. Sometimes within the church, we become people like this. Sometimes we push people away because we become so high maintenance. If we don't get what we feel like we wanted, we feel like we lost, but essentially, sometimes we win because that would not have been good for your life. And if we get what we want, essentially we lose. High maintenance people will never be happy regardless of the outcome. God freed them. God heard their prayers. God heard their cries. God heard their groanings. And all that they could say is, why did you take us out? Take us back. Take us back. Church, you will push people away because they will never please you, because even if they do what you want, you will feel like you didn't get what you wanted out of them. But maybe the biggest issue isn't people. Maybe the biggest issue is your faith. You treat God this way. We treat God this way. You expect things out of God, and even if He has answered your prayers, but it wasn't exactly what you asked for, you're not happy. Or maybe He hasn't answered your prayers because He's doing something more incredible in your life without it. The question is, do you trust Him regardless of the outcome? Sometimes you become expectant of Him doing something that you asked Him for. And this kind of behavior may not drain other people, but it will drain the faith that you claim that you had. And it will drain, and this is the biggest thing. So high maintenance people will never be happy. It will drain the joy that you could have had. But you refuse to have the joy because you didn't get what you wanted. Because even when God has blessed you with all that you've asked Him for, and even what you haven't asked Him for, or is protecting you from something that might hurt you, You won't be happy, even if it's for your own good. The people that are within this building, myself included, we can become like those kind of people in Israel. We can become people hard to please, hard to make happy, hard to go on a journey with. And, as we're pretty much in the eve of Thanksgiving, it's just 4 days away. For high maintenance people, it's going to make it very difficult to be thankful for something, because all that they will be thinking of is what they need to be asking for instead of what they have been given. But I want to encourage you that as we go through this week, think of everything that God has blessed you with, whether you've asked for it or whether you haven't. And if you're around on Wednesday, join us. We're having a Thanksgiving service, and I think it's great to hear what people are thankful for, because sometimes it causes us to reflect on the things that maybe we're not being thankful for. But be grateful for what God has given you. And as we close out this morning, I just want to remind you of a number of things. And that is that God hears you. God is working, even if you don't see it. Trust him along the way and trust him with the outcome, regardless of whether it is what you expected or it isn't. In order to maintain joy, we have to learn how to stop expecting others to maintain our emotions and start trusting God with the outcome, regardless of what it is. That is how we go from being high maintenance people to being thankful ones. Let's pray.